The El Recuerdo farm no longer lives up to its name. The memories are now like ghosts that whisper between the cracked walls and the peeling paint of the main house. The air that enters through the broken windows carries the smell of damp earth and the flowers that were once the pride of my garden, but which today wither in a desolate silence. This place, once the stage for laughter and songs, has become a mausoleum of the happiness that time and cruelty have taken away. The grandeur of the eye. Architecture only accentuates the emptiness, an imposing skeleton of a glorious past where I was the beloved and respected matriarch of a family that no longer exists. I move through these corridors like a shadow, a specter in my own home. At 80 years old, my body bends not only under the weight of age, but under the burden of a humiliation that is renewed with each dawn. My son, Fernando, the only remnant of my former life, treats me like a bothersome object, a final obstacle between him and the fortune he believes he deserves. I speak in whispers, afraid to disturb his peace, a peace he fills with the noise of his own greed. The loneliness here is a living entity, breathing the cold air that my son refuses to warm to save money. Today, however, a sliver of courage pierced my soul. It is the anniversary of my beloved husband's death, and I decided to honor him. With the few savings I keep in a cookie tin, I bought the ingredients to prepare his favorite dish. It is a foolish attempt, I know, to seek a moment of connection with Fernando, to remind him that, before being a ruthless businessman, he was a son, born of the love that once filled every corner of this farm. The kitchen, for the first time in years, was filled with an aroma that was, in itself, a prayer. My hands, gnarled and trembling with arthritis, struggled against the weight of the pans and the difficulty of chopping the spices. The cold of the house penetrates my bones, a constant punishment imposed by Fernando. He says it's a waste to turn on the heater for an old woman who no longer feels anything. But I feel the cold. I feel the hunger. And above all, I feel the piercing pain of being abandoned by my own blood. My eyes, a deep brown that once shone with joy, are now always teary, lost in a past where I was cared for and loved. When Fernando arrived, the afternoon sun was already painting the dusty floor of the dining room. He did not enter like a son returning home, but like an invader. His expensive suit, a gray as cold as his heart, seemed an insult to the dust and memories floating in the air. His face, marked by a cynical smile that never reached his eyes, analyzed the table I had prepared with such care. There was not a hint of curiosity or affection in him, only the cold calculation of a predator sizing up its prey. He was a stranger wearing the skin of the boy I raised. I had laid out our best tablecloth, now yellowed with time, and the only porcelain plate that survived his destructive fury. The aroma of the mole, rich and complex, was a bridge to a time when we sat at the table as a family. For an instant, a spark of childish hope lit up in my chest. Maybe today, just for today, he would remember. Maybe the taste of his childhood food could break the ice shell that encased his heart. I watched him in silence, holding my breath, waiting for a miracle I knew would not come. His contemptuous gaze swept the table and landed on me. I don't have time for your old lady sentimentality, he spat the words, and each syllable was a slap to my soul. His voice, once the melody that calmed me, was now the sound of breaking glass. He didn't even approach the chair. The gesture was quick, brutal. With the back of his hand, he pushed the plate aside, as if shooing away a disgusting insect. The plate that represented my last offering of love, the dark mole, the recipe I had spent days perfecting, splattered on the white tablecloth, creating an ugly, misshapen stain, a perfect reflection of the wound he had just opened in my chest. The sound of the earthenware hitting the wooden table echoed in the silent room. I stood frozen, looking at the wasted food, the effort of my trembling hands thrown away like trash. In that moment, the food was not just food, it was my heart, served on a plate and violently rejected, instinctively, like a wounded animal seeking to protect its most vulnerable point. My trembling hand flew to my neck, my fingers, closed around the small silver locket my late husband gave me on our first wedding anniversary. Inside, a tiny photo of us, young and full of dreams. It was my treasure, my amulet, the last tangible connection to the only person in the world who loved me unconditionally. The cold metal against my skin was the only real thing in a crumbling world. Fernando's predatory eyes followed my gesture. A cruel, victorious smile spread slowly across his lips. He didn't see a symbol of eternal love. He saw weakness. He saw one last attachment he could destroy. To him, the locket was not a sacred memory. It was just another piece of sentimental junk that tied me to a past he was determined to erase completely, so he could build his future on the ruins of mine. In 2 long strides, he crossed the distance between us. His strong, well-kept hands tore my fragile fingers from the locket. I had no strength to resist. I felt a sharp tug, and the thin silver chain scratched the wrinkled skin of my neck before it broke. The sound of the metal snapping was almost inaudible, but to me, it was like the cracking of my last thread of hope. He had desecrated the last sacred memory I had left. He held the locket between his thumb and forefinger, dangling it before my tear-filled eyes as if it were a disgusting trophy. Attached to junk? Forget the memories, he said with a contempt that froze my blood. His voice was calm, almost bored, which made his cruelty even more devastating. He wasn't angry. He was exercising power, reveling in his ability to annihilate me emotionally, piece by piece. With a theatrical gesture, he let the small locket fall onto the table. The metallic thud sounded like a death sentence in the oppressive silence. Then, he faced me, his eyes empty of any human emotion, and uttered the words that sealed my fate. Ya la vendi. The farm, the house, everything. He paused, savoring each word. You have a week to collect your rags and disappear. His words were not just words. They were stones thrown against the fragile structure of my existence. They hung in the air, heavy, cutting, irreversible. The world around me began to spin, the walls of the majestic farm seeming to close in to crush me. Losing the house was terrible, but what destroyed me was the realization that my son was not just selling bricks and land. He was selling my history, our legacy, my identity, for a handful of coins. In that moment, the pain transformed into something different, a dormant ember that, instead of being extinguished, began to glow in the depths of my soul. If you are moved by the beginning of this journey, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next, and comment from which city or country you are watching. Your presence gives us the strength to continue telling stories like Alma's. That night, the silence of the farm was a predator. Every creak of the old wood, every whistle of the wind in the window cracks, sounded like Fernando's footsteps, approaching to evict me. The darkness was total. He had cut the power to the main house, leaving me with a single candle whose trembling flame danced like my own panting breath. The cold no longer came from outside, but from within, an ice spreading from my chest, where the locket used to rest. I huddled in the worn-out armchair, a shipwrecked vessel in a sea of memories, sinking under the weight of his words. Ya la vendi. The humiliation was a bitter taste in my mouth. I saw my husband's face, everywhere, in his portrait on the wall, in the empty chair in front of me, in the pattern of the threadbare rug. And in each image, I felt I had failed him. I had let our legacy, the land he loved more than life itself, be torn from us by the greed of our own son. The tears I hadn't cried in front of Fernando now flowed freely, hot on my cold face. A river of grief not only for my husband, but for myself, for the woman I once was and who was now reduced to a rag to be discarded. It was in this abyss of despair that a distant memory shone through. An image of my husband, days before his death, hiding something under a loose floorboard in his office. He looked at me with a knowing glance and said, "For an emergency, mi amor. May the heavens grant you never need it." The emergency had arrived. With my body aching with every movement, I dragged myself to the office, the candle's flame casting my misshapen shadow on the walls. I found the floorboard and, with my brittle nails, managed to lift it. Inside, untouched, was a small wooden box. The box was simple, made of cedar, and the scent it exuded when I picked it up transported me instantly to my husband's workshop. It was the smell of work, of honesty, of love. For a moment, I just held it to my chest, feeling the last warmth of his hands on it. My fingers trembled as I opened the rusty metal clasp. Inside, there were no jewels or money, as Fernando's corrupted mind might imagine. There were only yellowed papers and, on top of everything, a letter sealed with his signet, addressed to me, for my Alma. With my heart beating erratically against my ribs, I broke the seal. His handwriting, firm and elegant, filled the page. It was like hearing his voice again, a balm for my wounded soul. The words were not of farewell, but of struggle. They were a testament of love and a call to arms I never expected to receive. Every sentence was a caress and a command, a declaration of faith in me, the woman he had always seen as a fortress, even when I felt like a grain of sand. The candle flickered, illuminating the words that would change everything. "Alma, my love," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it is because the fear that haunts me in my final nights has become a reality. I entrust to you not only our land, but our honor, the name of our family." My chest tightened. He knew. Somehow he foresaw the darkness growing in our son's heart. He sensed the threat that I, in my blind, maternal devotion, refused to see. The letter was a map, a compass he had left me to navigate the storm he knew would come. He continued, and his words seemed to etch themselves into my being, awakening a strength I thought was dead and buried. "Our son has a good heart, but I fear that greed will blind him. Promise me, my love, here and now, that you will be the guardian of our legacy, that you will be the fortress of this family, as you have always been. Fight for it. Fight for us." I read the last sentence in a whisper, and the promise formed on my lips, a sacred oath made to the ghost of my love. I promise. The tears streaming down my face were no longer of pain, but of a furious determination. The candle's flame seemed to burn brighter, reflecting the flame that was rekindling within me. The pain of humiliation had not disappeared, but it was now forged into armor. I was no longer fighting for a house with cracked walls. I was fighting to honor the last wish of the man of my life, to protect the sacred ground where we built our history, to defend the honor my son was willing to sell for nothing. The next day, when the sun rose, I was no longer the same woman. Fragility had given way to an icy serenity. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it had a purpose. It no longer paralyzed me. It sharpened me. The image of Fernando, his cruel smile, the feeling of the locket being torn from me, all of it became fuel for the fire my husband had lit with, his posthumous letter. The matriarch of El Recuerdo farm was back. However, reality was an intimidating wall. How could I, an 80-year-old woman without resources, with fragile health, face the legal machine and the relentless cruelty of my own son? The nights became an internal battlefield. Doubt was a poison, whispering in my ears that I was weak, old, senile, exactly as Fernando wanted everyone to believe. My already weary heart palpitated with the anxiety of the impending war, a war I would have to fight alone. Fernando wasted no time. 2 days later, he showed up with 2 men in suits, the buyers. He guided them through the house as if I were invisible, a piece of old, worthless furniture. They measured the rooms, discussed renovations, talked about knocking down the wall of my bedroom, all in front of me. The humiliation was calculated, designed to break me, to force me to accept defeat. I held my head high, holding my husband's letter in my apron pocket, feeling the paper like a shield. He intensified his psychological warfare. He cut the telephone line, my only link to the outside world. "What does an old woman need a phone for?" he told the curious neighbor, with a false smile. "She's getting confused, making up stories. I'm worried she might hurt herself." He was building the narrative, painting me as a senile and incapable elderly woman. preparing the ground to perhaps commit me to a nursing home if I resisted the eviction order. He didn't just want the house. He wanted to erase my voice. It was on one of these afternoons of siege that a miracle happened. A soft, almost timid knock on the back door. It was Sophia, my daughter-in-law, Fernando's wife. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she held her prominent belly with both hands, as if trying to protect her unborn child from the poison that surrounded us. She had come in secret, risking her husband's fury. "Alma," she whispered, and collapsed into my arms. She was a prisoner, too. A victim of Fernando's psychological abuse, isolated in the city, treated as an accessory to his luxurious life. He threatened her, controlled every penny, humiliated her. He told me that if I didn't support him in selling the farm, he would leave me with nothing and say the child isn't his. She sobbed against my shoulder. "I'm so scared, Alma. Scared for my baby, for his future." In that moment, looking at that terrified young woman who carried my grandchild in her womb, my fight gained a new dimension. It was no longer just about me and my husband's honor. It was about 3 generations of our family. It was about the future of that innocent child who deserved to be born into a legacy of love and dignity, not greed and betrayal. I hugged her with a strength I didn't know I still possessed, the strength of a lioness protecting her lineage. "We will not be afraid," I told her, and the words sounded firmer than I expected. "Your son will be born in this house. His grandfather protected it for him." I showed the letter to Sophia. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of hope. She saw what I saw. A chance. A weapon. She was no longer alone, and neither was I. A silent alliance was sealed in that embrace, a pact between 2 women united by pain and the determination to fight. Sophia's arrival was like that of an angel in the midst of hell. She was my eyes and ears to the outside world. Secretly, she used her cell phone to contact an old family lawyer, a man my husband trusted. She told him the story, sent a photo of the letter. The lawyer, an elderly man like me, remembered my husband's wisdom and righteousness and agreed to help us, even knowing the risks. The strategy began to take shape. Fernando had sold something that did not belong to him. My husband's letter, along with the original property documents that were in the box, were our proof. The will, which Fernando believed had been superseded by a power of attorney he forced me to sign years ago under false pretenses, was clear. I was the administrator and lifetime usufructuary. The property was intended for his future heirs, not for him. As the 1-week deadline ran out, the tension on the farm was almost unbearable. Fernando came every day, increasingly impatient and aggressive. He threatened me openly, describing in sordid detail the nursing home he would send me to. "You'll die there, alone and forgotten," he snarled, his face inches from mine. But I didn't look away. I stared at him, and I saw not my son, but a desperate, hollow man whose soul had been sold long ago. Sophia brought me food and news, in quick, risky visits. "The buyer wants to close the deal at the end of the week. He's going to bring a bailiff to ensure the eviction," she informed me, her voice trembling. "They will come on Friday at noon." The date was set. The day of the final confrontation. The day I would have to stand up and fight, not just with words, but with the strength of a love that not even death could erase. My husband's letter was worn from how much I read it. His words were my armor, my shield. Fight for it. Fight for us. I repeated the phrase like a mantra. The battle would not be easy. I was an old woman against a cruel businessman with money and connections. But I had something he would never have. A just cause. I was not fighting for money or power. I was fighting for the soul of my family. On the eve of the eviction, a strange calm came over me. The fear had turned into a cold, unshakable resolve. I prepared my clothes, the best dress I still had, the same one I wore to Fernando's baptism. I spent the night awake, not out of anxiety, but in vigil. I was on guard, protecting my home, my legacy, my grandchild. I would wait for them on the porch, not as a victim being evicted, but as the matriarch I had always been, ready to defend her home. Looking at the stars through my bedroom window, I talked to my late husband. I asked him for strength, for courage. I asked him to be by my side. I felt a deep peace envelop me, a certainty that no matter what happened the next day, I would be doing the right thing. I would be honoring our life together. I would be fighting not just for the past, but for a future that Fernando, in his blindness, could not even imagine. The El Recuerdo farm would still live up to its name. Friday arrived with a merciless sun that seemed to want to cook the dry earth and expose all the farm's wounds. At noon, the air was still, heavy with an almost solid expectation. I waited for them on the front porch, sitting in my old wooden rocking chair, which creaked softly in a calm and steady rhythm. I wore not mourning rags, but my best Sunday dress, a faded blue that recalled the sky on happier days. Beside me, standing with her hand resting on my shoulder, was Sophia. Her silent presence was a shield, a statement. We were no longer two victims. We were the resistance. Punctually, a luxury car, black and shiny. Like a beetle, came up the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust that seemed like a bad omen. Fernando got out first, adjusting his suit with an air of triumph. Behind him came the buyer, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, and a bailiff, whose face was a mask of professional impartiality. Fernando walked ahead, the cynical smile already on his face, ready to savor his final victory. He saw me, saw Sophia, and his smile widened even more, interpreting our presence as the final surrender. "Your time is up, Mother," he said, stopping on the first step of the porch, his voice loud for all to hear. "I hope you don't cause a scene. Leave peacefully, it's the last favor I ask." His arrogance was so great that he couldn't see the change in me. He still saw the trembling, frightened old woman he had been terrorizing for years. He didn't realize that the woman sitting in that chair was no longer his prisoner, but his judge. I kept my gentle, steady rocking, the creak of the chair being the only sound for a moment. I didn't look at Fernando. I fixed my gaze directly on the buyer, the man whose family, according to Sophia, was his top priority. I completely ignored my son, denying him the power of my attention. My voice, when I spoke, was not loud, but it sounded clear and firm in the still air, cutting the tension like a knife. "Sir," I began, and everyone fell silent to listen. "I'm sorry that you have traveled all this way. I am even sorrier that you have been deceived." Confusion spread across the buyer's face. He frowned, looking from me to Fernando, who immediately lost his smile. "What is this old woman talking about?" Fernando snarled, taking a step forward. The bailiff remained silent, observing, his duty compelling him to listen to all parties. I raised a trembling hand, asking for silence, and the gesture, coming from my fragile figure, had an unexpected power. All eyes were on me. "My son," I continued, the word sounding strange and formal, "offered for sale a property that does not belong to him." Fernando's jaw dropped. The accusation was direct, public. Before he could explode, I leaned to the side and picked up the leather folder that was on the floor next to my chair. With surprisingly steady hands, I opened it on my lap and took out the documents from the cedar box, the original property titles and my late husband's will, sealed and authenticated. I handed the papers to the bailiff, who took them with a professional but curious expression. "This is the will of my husband, Mr. Armando Rivera, the man who built this farm with his own hands," I explained, my voice gaining strength with each word. Fernando convinced me that the document was irrelevant. Superseded by a power of attorney he made me sign under deceit. "But the law, sir, protects the last will of an honest man." The officer began to read the document, his eyebrows slowly arching. I didn't need him to read it aloud. I knew every word by heart. My husband, in his immense wisdom and love for this family, never left the farm to Fernando, I declared. And this time I looked at my son. His color was fading, his face becoming a mask of panic and fury. He knew what was coming. Then, with all the solemnity the moment demanded, I revealed the truth that was our most powerful weapon. I placed my hand on Sophia's, which was still on my shoulder, and looked at her belly. My husband left this land for the future of our family. He left it for the son that my daughter-in-law, Sophia, carries in her womb. The impact of the revelation silenced the porch. The buyer took a step back, shocked. The future heir was there, protected in his mother's womb. With everyone's attention captive, I delivered the final blow of legal truth. As you can see in the document, I, Alma Rivera, am the administrator and lifetime usufructuary of this property until the heir reaches the age of majority. My voice did not tremble. My son, Fernando, had no legal right to sell a single stone of this place. The deal he made with you, sir, I said, turning to the buyer, is a fraud. The word fraud broke the spell. Fernando exploded. The mask of civility fell away, revealing the angry monster underneath. Liar! You senile, lying old woman! He shouted, his face red with fury. She's senile. She made up this whole story. This letter is fake. She's manipulating all of you. He gestured wildly, appealing to the officer, to the buyer, to anyone who might validate his crumbling reality. But I did not flinch. I did not look away. I rose from the rocking chair, feeling a strength in my legs I hadn't felt in years. I stood face to face with my son, and for the first time in his life, he saw no fear in my eyes. He saw pity. No, Fernando, I said, my voice low but laden with the weight of decades of pain and love. Your father did not leave this land to you for one single reason. I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle. The whole world seemed to hold its breath with me. I looked deep into his eyes, the same eyes I once cradled in my arms, and I delivered him the truth he had spent his whole life avoiding. He did not leave the farm to you because he no longer recognized the man you had become. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back a step, breathless, and I, finally free of my fear, free of my pain, completed my oath to my husband and to myself. Your father protected this land from you. He saved it. From your greed? My voice was just a whisper, but it echoed like thunder. You did not sell my house, Fernando. You sold your soul. A deathly silence fell over the porch. The words hung in the air, irrefutable, definitive. Fernando was pale, gaping, completely disarmed. His fury drained away, replaced by an empty shock. The buyer looked at him with absolute disgust. The bailiff, with a grave expression, carefully folded the will and looked at me with a new respect. The battle was over. And for the first time in a long time at El Recuerdo Farm, honor had won. Fernando's defeat was as swift and silent as his arrogance had been loud. The bailiff, after reviewing the documents and hearing the witnesses, informed him with cutting coolness of the serious legal consequences of attempted fraud and coercion of an elderly person. The buyer, the man Fernando saw as his business partner, simply turned to him with a look of pure contempt. I would never do business with a man like you, he said, his voice low and firm. Then, without another word, they all turned and left, leaving Fernando alone on the porch, a deposed king in a kingdom of dust and moral ruins. Before getting into his car, the buyer approached me. He took off his hat in a gesture of respect, his eyes showing sincere compassion. Mrs. Rivera, your courage is an inspiration, he said. Men like your son give a bad name to all of us who try to build something honest for our families. He handed me a business card. This is my personal lawyer, in whom I trust my life. Please, call him. The expenses will be on me. Ensure that justice is served to the end. I was speechless, accepting the card with a trembling hand. It was a gesture from a stranger that restored a bit of my faith in humanity. The news, like fire in dry straw, spread through the small rural community. The story of Dona Alma, the matriarch who faced down her cruel son and saved the farm, became a legend overnight. The same people who used to pass by, on the road and look away, afraid to get involved, now stopped. The day after the confrontation, my closest neighbor, a farmer named Javier, appeared at my door with a basket full of fresh bread, cheese, and fruit. "This is for you, Dona Alma. Forgive us for our silence. Your strength has given us courage." Javier's gesture was the first drop in a shower of kindness. Over the weekend, dozens of people from the village and neighboring farms arrived at El Recuerdo. They didn't come to gossip, but to work. They organized a work party, a community effort to bring the farm back to life. Men fixed the roof and the fences, women cleaned the rooms and brought pots of food, and the sound of hammers, saws, and laughter filled the air, chasing away the ghosts of loneliness and abandonment that had reigned there for so long. I was not a passive spectator in this resurrection. With an energy I hadn't felt in decades, I became the beating heart of the restoration. I guided the volunteers, shared the stories of every corner of the house, and, alongside Sophia, cooked large meals for everyone. The kitchen, the scene of my greatest humiliation, was transformed into a center of celebration and gratitude. I was giving back in food and affection all the love I was receiving, and with each day, Hacienda El Recuerdo became more like the home that lived in my fondest memories. Sophia blossomed, free from Fernando's toxic shadow. The constant fear in her eyes was replaced by a glow of confidence and joy. She took over the organization of the work party, coordinating supplies and tasks with surprising efficiency. She and I were no longer just a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law united by pain. We were partners, confidants, the matriarch and her heiress. The bond between us deepened, becoming a genuine mother-daughter love, forged in the fire of adversity and solidified in the joy of reconstruction. The lawyer recommended by the buyer was relentless and efficient. The evidence was overwhelming. The will, the letter, the testimony of Sophia and myself, and Fernando's own confession of fraud during the confrontation. Facing criminal charges and social ostracism, Fernando lost everything. His luxury-loving friends disappeared. His fraudulent businesses collapsed. He became the personification of his own wickedness, alone, disgraced, and penniless. His downfall was not revenge, but the natural consequence of a life built on greed and cruelty. While justice ran its course, life flourished on the farm. On a sunny spring morning, with the smell of fresh paint and new flowers in the air, Sophia gave birth to a strong, healthy baby boy. The birth was peaceful, taking place in a hospital in the nearby city, but it was to the renovated farm that she brought him home. Seeing her walk through the front door with my grandson in her arms was the true victory, the climax of our journey. With tears of joy streaming down my face, I took the small bundle in my arms. He was perfect. He had the dark eyes of the Rivera family, but the serene smile of his mother. Sophia looked at me, her own eyes shining. "What will his name be, Grandma?" she asked, granting me the honor. I didn't hesitate. "He will be named Armando," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Armando Rivera, like his great-grandfather, who protected this home for him. The circle was complete. The honor of the family name was restored. Hacienda El Recuerdo was reborn with a new purpose. It was not just our home, but a beacon of hope in the community. The story of our struggle inspired others, and the farm became a meeting place, a sanctuary where kindness was the currency. The doors that Fernando had closed to the world, we opened to everyone. The house he tried to sell for money, we transformed into a priceless treasure, a home full of life and love. On a golden afternoon, to celebrate little Armando's first month of life, we planted a new tree in the center of the main courtyard, a young jacaranda sapling. I held the root, Sophia placed the earth, and little Armando slept in a basket beside us, under the protective shadow of the house. That simple act was a powerful symbol. We were planting new roots, celebrating a new life, and ensuring that our family's legacy would continue to grow and flourish for generations. A deep peace, which I had not felt since my husband's death, finally settled in my soul. The ghosts that had haunted me had transformed into guardian angels. Looking at the vibrant farm, at Sophia's laughter, and at my grandson's serene face, I understood the true nature of strength. It comes not from power or money, but from the courage to protect what you love. Even when all seems lost, my pain had not been in vain. It had polished me into the fortress I needed to be. Greed can build empires of sand, but they crumble at the first breath of wind. Love, honor, loyalty, these are the rock foundations. Fernando tried to take the walls, the land, the bricks, but he could never take what truly mattered. The true inheritance was not in the property documents, but in the bonds that united us, and in the memory of the love that built that place. That was the final lesson his betrayal taught me. The future, which once seemed like a dark abyss, now stretched before us like a fertile, sun-drenched field. The farm was safe. My family was united. My Armando's legacy was protected. I, Alma Rivera, in the winter of my life, had found a new spring, proving to myself and to the world that it is never too late to fight, never too late to blossom, and that love, in the end, always wins. Have you ever made a gesture of kindness that changed a life? Leave a little heart if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more stories of second chances. Comment, "Love has no price," if you also believe in human kindness.